Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Hope you're doing well. Today, my guest is Marcela Rada, and if you're not familiar with her, she's an audio engineer who has worked in many different areas of the music industry, working on lots of different genres. She's worked in live sound, the studio, mixing, mastering, immersive audio, and a whole bunch more. And in addition to her engineering side of her business, she's also an audio educator, and she's worked at multiple schools, colleges, and universities around the world. So in today's episode, we talk a lot about the value of education in the music industry. Something I get asked a lot about is, should I pursue school? Should I go to it? Is it going to create opportunities for me in the industry? What can I learn in school that I can't learn online? That kind of stuff. It's something that I hear come up quite often in this industry. And to be honest, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of persuasion from schools to tell you that if you go to their schools, you're going to learn everything you need. You're going to get guaranteed jobs and all that kind of stuff. And so what I wanted to chat about with Marcela today was learn a little bit more about the value of education, where it's good, where it's not, what's necessary, what's not necessary. With Marcela, she is like an avid learner. She has gone to multiple schools, studied music in multiple ways, and she continues to educate herself. So she's someone who does value education. But as you're going to hear here, she does tell you that there are times when it might not be necessary for schooling. So I just think that if you're someone who's on the fence about maybe going to an audio college, this is going to be a really helpful episode for you because you're going to be able to hear the pros and cons. And you're also going to just learn about why having someone who's ahead of you, someone who's a mentor, can be very helpful to help you with your career, to learn their skills, and to create new opportunities for you to find work in this industry. So yeah, I think you're going to find this episode very interesting if you are someone who is interested in education and where the future of education is going with music production and whether you should participate in it or not. So with that said, here's my interview with Marcela Rada. Marcela Rada, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with you and the work that you're up to these days and, maybe your story, can you give us that background and how you got into music and all the cool stuff that you're working on these days?
Well, I got into music when I was a child. Basically, I've been in love with music since I can remember. And started playing instruments. And when I was about 12 years old, I decided that I was going to be an audio engineer when I discovered what an audio engineer does. And so since then, I kind of prepared myself to become an audio engineer. And so that's kind of how it all started. I've always just been in love with sound and, recording sounds and music, and always very tech oriented. And so this is why audio engineering was, what really caught my attention, because it's a mix of both worlds, music and tech. And I've had a very academic journey because I also love school, and I couldn't wait to go to university when I was a kid, and I had this whole plan, and I kind of followed that plan. And so I've just studied a lot, and I'm still studying. So yeah, I would say, audio engineer, educator, researcher, advisor, all kinds of things in the music industry and academia.
That's amazing. You said that you were 12 when you found out about what an audio engineer was, which seems super young for a lot of people. Like, how did you discover what an audio engineer was? Did you have people in your family that were into the music side of things, or was it just something you learned about in school, or where did that come from?
No, it just I stumbled upon it. I was reading about Dream Theater because I was listening to Dream Theater at the time, and I really liked them. And I read that some of the members of the band had met at Berklee College of Music. And so I looked up Berklee College of Music, and then I looked into what you could study there. And one of those programs was the MP&E program, Music and Engineering, and music production and engineering. And then I read more about it, and then I realized, oh, that's how music is recorded, basically. And that's what an audio engineer does. And that was the day I decided that's what I'm gonna do, that's what I'm gonna study. And kind of Berklee was the goal. So yeah, I did end up going to Berklee eventually.
That's awesome. Well, you touched on how you're big on education, and I know that, like, just even reading your biography, like, you're one of the few people I know who has gone to multiple schools to study music in a whole bunch of different areas. And I'm curious to know, like, I've had a lot of guests on the podcast talk about how you don't really need to go to school to get a job in the industry, and that, some people have claimed it's like a waste of time, that kind of thing. But I'm curious to get your take, because you're in this industry, you've been working in the industry for a long time, yet you continue to go to school and you continue to study all these different areas. So I'm curious to get your take on the role that, post-secondary education plays in breaking into this industry. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't go to school to get a job in a specific area. For me, like I said, I've always been very much an academic person. And for that reason, I agree that you don't need to go to school to do what you want to do unless it requires you to, or it's really your passion and what you want to do. And everybody learns differently, and everybody has different opportunities, and it really depends on many, many factors in your life. So if my journey inspires somebody, then I think that's great. But I would never tell somebody that this is what they have to do in order to get a job somewhere, or follow a specific. My path has been just very personal, and all the opportunities that I've had have been because I was at a very specific place, or because, it's just such a unique experience that I've had. And so for that reason, I think that people need to follow their path and their passions, and not necessarily do things because somebody else did or because somebody tells you to. A lot of jobs do require you to have some form of education, and not necessarily a PhD, which is what I'm pursuing at the moment, but definitely some form of education or experience. And not a lot of people have the opportunity to learn on the job, and so they go to school. And not a lot of people can go to school, but perhaps they can do an internship. And so, really, it does depend on what you want to do. I am an educator, I teach. And of course, this is the reason why I also have a few degrees and I haven't left school. And it's because I need to continue educating myself and doing the research so then I can teach current information, right?
Of course.
So that's the reason why. But a lot of these schools, it really does depend. What I would recommend if you would like my advice, whoever is listening to this, is that you really do your research on the education that you invest on, because I've heard a lot of people say that they went somewhere and they didn't learn anything, or that it was a waste of money, or that, doing audio engineering and music production is something that you really got to be passionate about. It's not just, because it's so unique and it's so tailored to your interests, perhaps. And so if you study this, it's because you really truly love it, and you're willing to put in a lot of work, and you're willing to spend money and time and all your resources, basically. um, and so that's number one. And if you do decide to pursue, post-secondary education, I would recommend to do the research on the school that you go to, and perhaps, really look into all the possibilities before you commit. Because not all of the schools are great, it's true. And some of them promise people a lot of things, but in reality, the quality of the education is not what they're promising a lot of the time. And so it really does depend. But I always look into who I'm going to learn from. facilities, resources and reputation, perhaps, all of these things. And so that's if your listeners are looking into pursuing a career in audio engineering or music production and they want to go to school for it, I think that's great. And if that's how you learn and that is how you think you'll benefit from these schools, then great. I definitely recommend it. It's just, I think it's a matter of really doing your research. And if that is not your path and you're not an academic person and this is not how you learn, then there are other ways. But also look into really what you want to do. Ultimately, the dream job that you have and whether it requires you to have some kind of degree, because nowadays people that have degrees would be a lot more competitive compared to people who don't. And this is because it's a lot easier to study and get a degree nowadays in many different countries and cities. And so, because these programs are more available now than they were before, when people had to intern and do all kinds of things before they could actually learn from somebody. Now that we do have access to education, a lot more people have degrees, and so those people would be more appealing to employers compared to those who don't. But if you have a great CV and a great portfolio that speaks for itself, then that's great too. But you got to work really hard to build that.
Of course. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think it's really important for people to hear kind of hear the experience and thoughts of someone who both teaches this, but who also is busy in the industry. And I think it is interesting to hear your perspective, because a lot of kind of like what you talked about earlier, there's a lot of schools that promise you, the world when you go to their school, and you're going to guarantee all these great jobs and blah, blah, blah. But like, to hear you as the teacher be like, yep, I mean, school's a good thing. It can help a lot of people, but you don't really need it. I think that's kind of a refreshing take to hear.
You don't need it for depending on what you want to do. There are
Fair,
certain things
yes.
that you definitely need school for.
Yes.
And I do not regret going to school at all. And I will go to school forever if I could. And so it's not that you don't need it. You got to really do your research on whether you do or not, whether you're going to need a degree to get that job.
Yeah.
And if not, then cool, do whatever you need to do. But it's also important to assess that, Is this something that I must do? Is this the only place where I'm going to learn this certain skills? Is this the only place where I'm going to learn from this certain person? And if that's the case, then yeah, it is what it is. But not everybody learns the same way, and school is expensive. So yeah, a lot of factors play into that.
Of course. Well, you kind of also touched on the idea that, like, for you, like, schooling is just a way of getting stronger and stronger at your skills. And I think that's a really important thing to touch on too, because I think that there's a lot of people that, like, what I found is a lot of people just get into music production primarily because they're musicians themselves, they're working on their own music, and they're trying to finish a specific project, let's say, or they want to record their record or whatever it is, a song. But what I find a lot of people doing, at least in my experience, is that, like, a lot of people are just focused on getting the songs done and not necessarily focused on, like, enhancing their skills and getting better at their skills and, like, really workshopping those. And for you, it sounds like the way that you strengthen your skills is by getting more education, studying a lot more, and learning a lot more about the industry. But I'm curious to know, like, what are some of your recommendations for helping people see growth in their skills quickly? Like, if it's not going to school, like, what are some of the recommendations you'd have for someone to get better at, their audio engineering skills, aside from maybe just trying to get a project done as quickly as possible, kind of thing?
Well, another thing that is important to consider is that there are many jobs in audio, and in the music industry. And some of them are more perhaps scientific, and then some of them are more creative. And so that's another aspect of it. The ones that do required, for example, to know coding, to know software engineering, to know electrical engineering, to know a lot of other things, AI, perhaps artificial intelligence is also huge now in audio. These are all things that do require you to have some kind of education, and you're going to have to learn this somewhere from someone. And someone's not going to teach you unless you pay them. So whether you pay a mentor or school, you are going to have to learn those skills somewhere. If it's something more creative that just kind of comes to you naturally and that you're already naturally very good at and you understand the technology and you're just getting creative at home, that's different, you know? And if you're sound designing and playing music and composing and then perhaps mixing at home, that's different because those are skills that you can perhaps, develop on your own. So I would say, kind of separating those two worlds and understanding where you actually need to get the skills from is one thing. Um, and then after that, it's a matter of, okay, you learn the skills. You gotta really get practicing and finding opportunities to keep working, right? I think, it's a matter of really putting in a lot of hours. And it's hard in this industry where it's hard to find work that pays well, number one. And a lot of people get discouraged by that. And so I think you gotta put in a lot of time and effort to build your network as well, so you can get more work, so you can get better at it. You know what I mean? And so this industry is very much about who you know and who knows you and who's gonna recommend you. More so than just applying for a job online. So working on those relationships and building your network, perhaps a reputation, is important because then once you start getting more work because people know about you, then you can continue developing those skills as you work, right? So it's all kind of very connected and all this also personal skills that you're gonna have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, obviously, you're going to get better the more you can implement this stuff and the more practice you can get with it. So, I guess if you're not working on your own music or maybe helping out local artists or whatever, it's like finding that network that can get you some more opportunities to practice your craft and get better at
Hmm.
that then, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And also, this is why, it takes a lot of effort because perhaps you're going to have to work doing something else while you start making money.
Mhm.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
And that discourages a lot of people. But that's why I said initially that this is something that you got to be very passionate about. So if it's your dream, you're going to really put in the effort.
Yeah, yeah. So then how do you balance like your workload with all your studio projects while still like studying all this stuff? Like how does that look like in your life?
I work a lot, but I like it. That's just kind of part of my routine, my life. I love working because I like everything I do. So that's another thing. If you don't like what you're doing, it just seems a lot harder. But when you really love it, every day is a good day, because you're doing things that you like. And doesn't matter how much time and effort you have to put into it, you're doing something that you love. And so when I feel that I'm learning, when I feel that I'm just working on something really cool, when I feel that I'm collaborating with people that I'm learning from or who are learning from me, that all kind of encourages me to work hard and to continue doing that. I wouldn't say I'm the best person to advice on balancing things in life because I work a lot. But it's a part of who I am. And it's a part of how I like to live and do things. And so I see, work as also an opportunity to be with people that I like to be surrounded by, for example. I am with scientists all the time, people that are brilliant and so smart, and they push me, to learn more and to read more and to, So I put myself in places where I feel encouraged to just do more and do better, and I like that. Um, but yeah, in terms of balancing, I think I think it's easier when you're doing things that you like to do, and it takes time to get there, but you can get there. And being a part of circles. I think that's really important. Being a part of circles of people that are that you can learn from, or that just simply encourage you to do more and do better. I think, when you're surrounded by people that don't give you that, you start feeling stuck, or you get discouraged, or you don't work as hard because you kind of just see people around you doing the bare minimum. So I think that just plays a huge role in how I work and how I feel about work. But I do work a lot, and I have very weird hours, and I'm awake all night, and but it's fine. I like it, and I'm happy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing then, right? Like when people talk about the work-life balance, it's about figuring out what that means for you, and if it means a lot of
Hmm.
work but you're enjoying that, and that's the thing that gives you, I think like work-life balance is like what it comes down to is feeling fulfilled. And so,
Hmm.
the people who say like they work too much, it's because they're missing out on the the other elements of their life, the family, the friends, or whatever, like, the entertainment, that side of things. And that's what they need to balance out. But it's like if you are really big on working and you're enjoying that and that's fulfilling you enough, then like some of the other stuff you don't need it as much, and you kind of figure out what that scale looks like for you. But
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think everything I do is kind of an adventure for me. And I've moved a lot, and I've done lots of different things, and I'm always kind of around different people. And and in that way I get the social aspect of it. The entertainment also is there because it's music and it's a creative environment.
Mhm.
So I still see it as an outlet for creativity and socializing, and yeah, but yeah, it really does depend on what's important to you, and if perhaps being with family, or starting a family, or doing all these other things that are very important in life. If that's what also drives you, then yes, you got to find ways to incorporate that. But yeah.
Of course. Yeah, you talked about trying lots of different things. And when I look at your career, you've covered a lot of different areas in the music production industry. Like you've done everything from like live sound, studio work, scoring, immersive work, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm curious to know, like, with all of those different experiences, obviously you're learning a lot along the way. And I'm curious to know, like, how do you feel like all those different areas have influenced each other, or just maybe your current work ethic?
I think everything has been very connected and has led me to where I am now. I try things, and then I decide whether that's the path that's for me, or whether I need to go somewhere else. For example, I decided I didn't want to do live sound. And that it wasn't for me, but I tried it, and then I was like, yeah, not for me. I'd rather do studio. Um, and then when I started teaching, I loved it so much, then I decided, okay, yes, I am going to continue doing this, and it's always going to be a part of my life, you know? And I am somebody that has to be doing different things. And so I do research, I teach, I advise, I do this, I do that. I'm in the music industry, I do conferences. And all of that just kind of keeps me busy, but keeps me interested in doing different things. And that is why you see kind of many different things in my profile, because I that keeps me, I guess, that keeps me balanced, because I feel that if I only did the one thing, um, I would definitely kind of feel stuck. And I think that's one of the reasons why I try so many different areas, and I'm part of so many different things, but also because I have the skills, to do different things, and I've built those skills, and I've worked hard to learn those skills. So if I see an opportunity where I think I would thrive and do well, I go for it. Even if it's maybe not something that I've done before. Um, I inquire, I talk to people, I see if, we see if there is kind of a vibe, and then I do it. So that is why. But I think everything just kind of leads you to something else. I've worked on projects that where I met certain people that would then call me years later to do something else in a completely different area, and that goes back to, keeping that network and those working relationships and being somebody that people want to work with is very, very important. So not just developing those technical skills, but being somebody that people will keep in mind and call whenever, they think of you for something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's also interesting too because I hear a lot of people talk about this idea of like niching down and like get into like one field and maybe like niche down your service, niche down your genre of music, that kind of thing. Like people talk about be a mixing engineer for specifically like metal music or something like that, right? But there is something to be said, I think, and I have a lot of experience working in different areas of the industry as well. I think there is something to be said for diversifying your skills, diversifying your talents, and trying different areas of the industry. Because, like you mentioned, like, you might try live sound and realize that you hate it. And then it's like, cool, maybe you tried it, you learned some stuff along the way, and then you try something different, and you can now apply some lessons that you learned in live sound to this new thing and get really good at that thing. So there are a lot of different opportunities that you can create for yourself when you do diversify your skills, and you can definitely take things from each area and work on your workflows and your just your skills in general. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that works for other people too. Again, I'm speaking from my personal experience, and I mentioned that I have to be doing different things to keep my mind entertained. But that doesn't mean that that would work for other people. Perhaps for some people, they just want to get really good at one thing, and I think that's great. You want to be the best mixing engineer for heavy metal, then great. Do that, and if that keeps you happy, then that's good too. I think, it's important to be really good at one thing and be known for one thing. I think that's also really good. And I've worked on being known for mostly, education and influencing the industry and academia in that way.
Mhm.
So I think we all kind of work towards being known for one thing or being really good at one thing. And I think that's good too.
Totally. And I guess, yeah, in your story, it's like that commonality is education. Everything you've done has come back
Hmm.
down to education, whether it's like educating yourself or educating others and, learning different areas, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it definitely seems to be your commonality there. One thing I've heard you say before, and I agree with this, is that I've heard you mention that when you're a teacher, it's almost like you're a student too. And I was wondering if you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that and what that means like to you.
Well, you gotta keep studying, especially in an area where technology changes so much and so often. You could be teaching something, and same year there was a huge development, and then now we do things in a different way. And so you got to learn that. So then you teach your students what's happening now. I think it's, as an educator, it's my responsibility to keep updated, and to make sure that I'm not teaching information that's not even relevant anymore. And so this goes back to looking into the school that you're going to go to and how much they actually care about developing curriculum. Because if you go somewhere where they have been teaching the same class, same way for 5 years, 10 years, that's a long time in technology.
Hmm.
And so it's important to be somewhere where it's, where they keep up with the changes. And that is, I think, it is my responsibility to make sure that I know what's current so then I can teach my students current information. I wouldn't want them to go out there not feeling prepared or ready because they didn't learn what they actually needed to know.
Absolutely. So then where do you see the future of audio education heading? Like, what do you see as the next thing that people should be looking out for if they are looking into a school?
I think definitely AI needs to be part of the curriculum, and we can't work against it. So we need to work with it. We need to learn how to use it, and we need to implement it and employ it in our workflows. So schools definitely need to be teaching AI for mixing, mastering, for doing all these things that are already kind of happening.
It's interesting that you say that because I feel like the opposition against AI is like, oh, AI is going to take our jobs and we're not going to need to go to school for audio engineering because the AI is going to mix our songs for us and that kind of thing. I'm curious to now get your take on that. And like, you're talking about how it's important to learn about AI in a school setting, but what are the advantages of learning about it instead of just being fearful, like this is going to take our job? Like how can we turn the story on AI to be a positive thing?
If you don't learn to use it, the person that does learn to use it is going to take your job.
Fair.
Because somebody's gonna have to still use it, to get the work done.
Yeah.
And so you either learn it and use it and charge for what you know, because it's not just, you still need to kind of understand the concepts, and use the technology to apply it to the production. It's not magic. It's not that you just think about it and it happens. And so it's here to stay, and I think it's just important to learn how to use it and work with it and work smart.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with that. I think that you do have to definitely be learning about the technologies as they come out. And whether you like them or not, it's like, if that is the future of the industry, you need to learn that skill and try it out. See if you can monetize that. If you can, get known for being good at that skill. It's like when you look at like analog and digital, it's like there's people that are still purists in the analog world, and there's still people making a great living running analog studios, but the rest of the world has mainly gone onto digital and moving forward. And now it's like this AI element is going to change the way we approach our productions as well. So, maybe we're going to eventually have just the digital basic audio recording people, and then there's going to be like the AI specialists, the new way of recording everything in AI. I don't know, but I do think that you have to be embracing that technology as it comes. And like you said,
recording was probably not going to change much. That analog part of sound would still be relevant. You still need to know how to record and use microphones.
Fair. People are still using analog equipment and playing analog equipment, analog instruments, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So as long as we have musicians playing real instruments, then we're gonna need that analog equipment to record. But yeah, I was just talking more about mixing, mastering, and then the things that can be done with AI, and because that will get better. Those tools will get better, and so it's important to know them. But what was the question?
It was just mainly where I was originally going was where do you see the future of audio education?
Oh, right. Also, spatial audio. Of course, that's what I'm doing research on, and it's that format that is here to stay. So learning spatial audio technology is also very important.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to dive into your research then. So for people who might not know, you've been doing a lot of research on workflows and guidelines for immersive music production. And I'm like, can you elaborate on what your research includes and, why you chose to study that, what your findings have been, that kind of thing?
I chose to study that because at the university where I was teaching full-time before I started my PhD, they asked me to teach a course on immersive music production. And there's no literature out there to guide the that curriculum design. And so I tried, but I wasn't very happy with it because I felt that I didn't know enough and I needed to do more research. And so this is why I started the PhD, to do the research so then I can teach it properly and so I can help other educators teach it properly. And so what I want to do is kind of merge that gap between academia and the music industry, because now more than ever, all these concepts that we've researched for decades on spatial audio technology can now be applied to music production now that streaming platforms support spatial audio. And so all these concepts need to be applied to workflows, but to creative workflows as well. And so what I'm working on is finding out what information needs to be shared, how it should be shared, and and how to include everybody that's part of the music production process, and not just engineers mixing, but the composers and the producers and everybody that is part of it, to ensure that we're all on the same page and that we're all thinking immersive. So then there is a goal from the beginning as to how the production is going to sound. But for this to happen, everybody needs to have specific knowledge, um, to play a part in that production. And so that's basically what I'm working on, finding out what everybody needs to know, how it should be delivered, and as technology changes, also influence that to make sure that we are all working together.
Of course. I know that you're still researching it, but with what you've done so far, have you found any specific trends or anything like that you would recommend as far as workflows when it comes to immersive?
I think, education, it seems to be a big gap in that people are learning in their own ways, and mostly online. And the information that's out there is informing people on how to use specific tools, but perhaps not a lot of those technical ear training skills, or everything, the psychoacoustics and audio perception that we need to take into account. And so that is what I've noticed the most, that there's just a huge need for all this information to be transferred to the music industry.
Hmm. Yeah, in talking to a lot of different guests on the podcast about immersive, it kind of seems like to some degree it's a bit of the Wild West as far as like, how to actually mix in it right now. Cause like people are discovering that now we have so many speakers around us and there's like, we can play with this. And it's like, it seems like people are kind of, when they first get into immersive, they just go like crazy and they start experimenting almost like too much. And it gets like maybe too creative to some degree. Whereas like, when we look at like stereo recording, we kind of have somewhat of a formula now for like making a standard mix. Like there's certain things that are panned in certain positions, that kind of stuff like that.
Right.
Do you feel like in
But
immersive, like
remember how we started with
fair?
stereo?
Yeah, it's true.
And and that was a process as well to find out what works. And before we had drums on the left and guitar on the right. So it's the same thing now. It's good. It's a process that is going to take time for all of us to learn. And I can see the improvement in just this past year, with the record labels and everybody just kind of coming up with guidelines and recommendations. So it's the same thing. It's not that it sounds bad, it's just that there's some music that's sounding really good in immersive. And so it's just a learning curve.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess like to some degree, one of the things that attract a lot of artists to the immersive world is the fact that you have that wide open playing field and you can get crazy with it. You can get very experimental with it. And so I can see how some people might say like, well, if we start standardizing the way we do things, or if we start having like a specific guideline for how to do immersive, then it might hinder some people's creativity throughout the process. So
I think once you really know the technology, then that is not a limitation anymore, And then you can get very creative once you just understand what the possibilities are, and then you become inspired by those possibilities. And so the learning curve is what's just really hard right now, because trying to figure out how it works and how to be in the room, and accessibility, of course, is to a room with 12 speakers is hard too. So, but it will become more accessible and it'll become easier, and we'll learn a lot more. And once all that's figured out, I think eventually and ultimately the goal would be to just be creative with it.
yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Marcela, I know you're tight on time today, so we can start to wrap up here. But if people wanted to learn more about you and your research and the work that you're working on these days, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I'm very active on social media. So I'm the Marcela Rada on all social media platforms. I share about my research on LinkedIn a lot, but also Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. So pretty active on social media. Yep. So that would be the best place.
Awesome. Right on. Well, I'll include some of those links in our show notes as well, so people have that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that was my interview with Marcela Rada. And I think that if you're someone who has been debating possibly going to school, like a university or college, to study music production, I hope that this interview helped answer some questions for you, because I think Marcela did a great job of explaining the benefits of audio education and going to a university or college, and some of the pros and cons of it, and where it might be necessary, where it might not be necessary, and if it isn't necessary, how you can still get your foot in the door, expand your network, and strengthen your skills, and ultimately find opportunities in the industry. So I think she covered a lot of that in this episode here. So if you are someone who has been debating post-secondary education when it comes to music production, I think she did a great job of answering a bunch of those big questions. I also thought it was really interesting to learn more about her studies in the world of immersive technology and where that is heading. You know, we've talked a lot about immersive mixing and Atmos on this podcast. And one thing that's come up time and time again is that it kind of does seem like it's a bit of the Wild West right now. It's still very new. And we have a lot of people that don't know where they should be panning things in their mixes. And, you know, to some degree, that could be a really cool thing. It can open up a lot of creativity in the mixing stage. Yeah, I think that if we make Atmos kind of a gimmicky thing, people are going to get burnt out by it really quickly. So I like the idea that she's studying this stuff, trying to find ways that we can standardize the process and that we can create some guidelines so that there is a little bit more consistency in the process. So yeah, I think that the research that she's doing there is going to be really helpful for people moving forward. And especially since she is in the education space, having someone who can have some standardized ways of approaching Atmos and approaching immersive audio, and then being able to pass that on to new generations. I think that's a really important thing too. So definitely cool to learn more about her research there. So yeah, I hope that you found that episode helpful. And I think that one of the things that kind of came up throughout this episode a lot is the idea that if you are going to be learning about this stuff, you want to be learning from people who know what they're talking about. You want to learn from people who are ahead of you and have the experience and have the optimized workflows and all that kind of stuff to learn from, so that you can learn what you need to know and none of the fluff. So if you're someone who's struggling with your music production and you want to learn what you could be doing in order to make your home recording sound pro, you want to know what steps to be taking during the recording, editing, and mixing process, and ways to work fast and confident and get pro results. Well, if you're someone like that, then I would love to work with you. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that is exactly what I do. I work one-on-one with my students to help them throughout the entire production process. You're going to learn everything you need to know from point A to point Z, and you're going to get personalized support throughout the entire process as well. So as you implement everything, you're going to be able to get feedback. You're going to be able to get your questions answered. This is all about helping you with your current skill level and workshopping through any troubleshooting issues that you're currently having with your process. We're going to streamline that process, get you working faster, more confident, and get you better results. So if you're interested in learning more about Amplitude and how you can get one-on-one help with your music productions, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find all the details on that page there. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you. I'd love to learn more about your current processes, your current goals, and to see what's working for you, what's not working for you, and how I can help. And then if it does seem like I can help you, I'd love to work with you to help you get the results that you want to hear out of your speakers. So once again, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find all the details on that page there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.